guys, I fear that I've done you on this channel a great disservice. And that is in that we have not interacted with one Daniel Dennett. So far, we've taken a look. I think we have some Richard Dawkins, some Sam Harris, definitely Alex O'Connor, one of the favorites. But I have not interacted deeply with Daniel Dennett on why religion is a myth. So guys, without any further ado, if you like what we do on this channel, that's the wrong logo, it's my other channel, like, comment, share, subscribe, and without any further ado, we're going to get straight into it. Take it away, Daniel Dennett.
Where do you think such longing arises?
Well, I think the longing for comfort is not hard to understand. Death is a terrible blow, and our species is unique in all the species on the planet in being able to imagine our deaths and knowing that we're going to die. And
that's actually a really good point. The whole imagining our deaths, I've heard it blamed on the frontal lobe before, that now human beings can have our hypotheses die instead of ourselves. We're able to imagine scenarios, and a lot of the scenarios that we imagine, we die at the end, and we're like, oh, we got to avoid that. Let's try to think of something else, right? And so when we stopped kind of being ruled by the motor cortex and started really beginning to plan things and have discussions around planning for events, we really started to engage metacognitively with the idea of death, and you know, psyched ourselves out. Understandably, I like that point. I'm gonna let him cook.
Deaths, and knowing that we're going to die, and not liking that idea.
Right.
And I think we have two competing urges. This is not so much my theory as the theory of several other people that I discuss in my book. One of them is. And these are rooted actually in our biology. They're even rooted in our genes. And one of them is to get away from a corpse. It's dangerous. It's a source of disease. It is something to withdraw from. At the same time, this is a loved one, and that's something to approach. So we're tugged in two completely different directions, and you can't just leave.
I really like where he's going. See, Daniel Dennett is a really peculiar kind of mind, and I stepped away from Dennett because he wasn't able really to grok the hard problem of consciousness. And I think even Daniel Dennett himself mentions that David Chalmers emailed him telling him, you know, about his book Consciousness Explained. You know, David Chalmers let Daniel Dennett know, you don't understand the hard problem. You're failing to grasp this thing. And so, you know, I haven't really interacted with a lot of Daniel Dennett's work, but I really like where he's going with this, because he's talking about an intercategorical problem, which is horror, right? What we're trying to escape when we escape death is horror, right? Which is an intercategorical threat. Intercategorical means that we don't exactly know how to categorize it. Is it a loved one, which I should normally approach? Or is it a source of disease and decay and a reminder of my inevitable end? It's kind of both. And when I mention the intercategorical threat, you think of monsters. That's why I brought up horror movies. Any monster is going to be an intercategorical threat. How do I categorize Freddy Krueger, right? Is he in the dream world or the real world? You know, is Chucky a child's toy or a mass murderer? Yeah, I mean, so I like where he's going with this. He's getting really deep here.
In two completely different directions.
Right.
And you can't just leave the body of a loved one there. You have to do something.
But this
and out of that grows the rituals, the burial rituals, and out of that grows the sense that that person is still there. After all, your head is still teeming with, well, I wonder if she'd like, and what would she think of, and can she see me now? All of these.
Which kind of shows that maybe the person was a way of being as opposed to a human being. Because when the human dies, you're still thinking in terms of their patterns, right? You're still thinking in terms of their spirit, their way of being, right? You think, well, would she like to be, you know, this? And, oh, I know that she liked flowers, so we're going to get these kinds of flowers. We're going to invite these people. We're not going to invite that nasty person who, you know, she blah, 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 and this. And you're still thinking in terms of that pattern. And that pattern is still among us, right?
Habits of mind that we have about anybody that's close to us, whether we love them or hate them, actually, those habits don't just stop when a person dies.
Right.
And so it's very natural to understand how those habits could be turned into a sort of hallucinatory presence.
But how is it hallucinatory? A hallucination is what happens when your mode of interpretation of reality doesn't match reality itself. And what we realize when someone dies is, oh, their body wasn't what they are. Because if their body was what they are, we would take the body home, stuff it with dry beans, and put it on the porch. Right? You know, so how is it a hallucinatory presence? Like the fact that we think of people in terms of their way of being, and I still do this. My mother passed a couple of years back, and I think of her in terms of her way of being. When my wife and I are listening to, you know, Simon and Garfunkel, my mom was a big fan of Paul Simon. So my wife happens to be a big fan of Paul Simon also. And whenever we're playing Paul Simon, it's like, yo, like I kind of get that spirit of my mom. That way of being is still around. The jokes that my mother used to laugh at, the foods that she used to enjoy, the degree to which we partake in that. It's like that way of being. This is kind of one of the things that Jesus meant by like, I am the way, right? Participate and identify as a way of being as opposed to merely a human being, such that when the human being dies, you don't die along with it.
What we might call Dostoevsky's mistake, and that is, if God is dead, everything is permitted. Now, that does not follow at all. That is a myth that has done a tremendous amount of damage in the world, and any atheists who think that an implication of their atheism is that there's no difference between right and wrong, that there's no room for morality, I think it has made a very serious mistake. It's a mistake.
I wonder how he solves that, because a lot of people, you know, I think one of Sam Harris's greatest blunders, according to the majority of philosophers who read The Moral Landscape, for instance, is, you know, assuming that, you know, normativity can become scientific, let's say. I wonder how Dennet would deal with that.
Mistake which is very easily made because so many religious people insist on this principle as well. They seem to think that without God, there can't be any goodness, there can't be any morality. This is belied, I think, by everything we know. And notice, finally, that even if it were true that we needed God to tell us what's right and wrong, God doesn't tell us. Only God's self-appointed representatives on earth tell us. So in other words, we're going to have to tell each other anyway.
I think that that's a really fair point. However, I do believe that God tells us. You know, I think that we're impinged upon by that which is transcendent, that which is fundamental, right? And by saying we're impinged upon by what's fundamental, I'm not just using fancy, flowery language. I mean it in the same way that a wave on the ocean is impinged upon by the ocean itself. It has to crest and then inevitably fall in line, right? If I started doing an Indian accent, which I would be bad at, I would be impinged upon by my normal accent. I would feel this pressure to return to the homeostasis, that which I'm comfortable with. So if we feel that God is the one being that we all emerged from, the idea that we are the breath of God fundamentally, as it says in Genesis, then morality would just be associative behaviors like sharing and compassion. And the reason associative behaviors would be considered morally good is because there is a pure association, which is the reduction base. That's the thing impinging upon us.
Human beings can figure out what is reasonable, what is rational, and what is moral. Human society has evolved to the point where we can sit down and reason, and of our own free will arrive at the best principles to govern our lives by our own lights after open, free, reasonable discussion, fact-based discussion. That's the basis of morality. It's always been the basis of morality. If you look at the morality in the Old Testament, compare it to the morality today, you'll find that it has changed a great deal, and it has changed because people's ideas about what makes sense, what's right and wrong, have evolved. They've grown up. And
They've evolved and they've grown up. I agree that they've changed, but they've changed in the same way that a seed changes into a tree. Because you and I inevitably stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. You and I are a common synthesis, which has arrived as a result of several theses and antitheses, right? I know that that's Hegelian in its structure, right? But we have to be careful before we criticize the past, right? And say, oh, they were wrong, because we, primitive versions of ourselves, all of the matter and all of the ideas that make us up today were present in some, some random state back then, waiting to become us.
It's not because God told them something different today than told them before. It's they just figured out that they could no longer tolerate the interpretations of what God was supposedly telling them morality was, that used to pass muster. So we're stuck telling each other as best we can how to live our lives and what makes sense morally. And if it helps you to adorn that process with an imagined deity that speaks to you, that's a psychological fact about you, but it plays no role in the discussion.
One that's been
I don't think that was necessarily an impressive argument against religion or God.
interesting me more recently is how a number of social institutions depend on the ignorance of those that they exploit. Whether it's a Ponzi scheme where the individual investors are sort of almost
Sorry, I want to rewind this just a little bit so I can really interact with what he's saying here. I think I missed the beginning.
Me more recently is how a number of social institutions depend on the ignorance of those that they exploit.
Social institutions depend on the ignorance of those that they exploit. That's a fact.
Whether it's a Ponzi scheme where the individual investors are sort of almost complicit in their ignorance of what's going on because it's not worth their while to be too inquisitive about what's going on until it's too late. And in particular, religions. I think that perhaps the single most important change in the world as far as religion is concerned is electronic communication.
The most significant change for religion has been electronic communication. Let's see how he unpacks this.
The internet and cell phones, transistor radios for that matter, going back a little bit. For thousands of years, religions thrived in an environment where information was hard to come by, and you could more or less assume that individual members of each group were not only ignorant of other religions, but even ignorant of a lot of their own religion's history and practices.
I don't know how I feel about this one, because we don't see wild deviations across religions, do we? There are deviations, to be sure, moral differences, differences in the myths, differences in the gods or whatever. For instance, there was a continuous cosmos before the God of the open future, which was ushered in by the Hebrews. The continuous cosmos, the God was determined by power alone, what they called glory, right? And the more glorious you were, the more godlike you were, until in the Bronze Age, the Pharaoh of Egypt was considered a god because he had amassed to himself so much power. And then that changed, with the God of the open future being introduced. But I don't know that there are wild differences across religions. Maybe there are.
But even ignorant of a lot of their own religion's history and practices. And this easily maintained ignorance was, I think, sort of the lifeblood of religious solidarity. Our bodies are composed of maybe even 100 trillion cells, and they cooperate pretty well. The human ones are only about 10% of those. and the rest are all visitors of one sort or another. And just take your human cells, the ones that have your genome. The body never has to worry about, your thumbs learning something and then rebelling and deciding to abandon ship.
Well, the body does rebel against itself. I mean, there's autoimmune diseases, there are cancer cells. What's interesting about the body rebelling is that it's a kind of selfishness, specifically when we're talking about cancer. It goes along with the work of Dr. Michael Levin from Levin Labs. He's an amazing cancer researcher. And Michael Levin talks about cancer as, it's kind of a selfish cell. Like it doesn't want to cooperate with the other cells in finishing when it completes an organ. It wants to continue to spread. And it kind of has this selfish, not playing along, type of energy, which, I feel like the religious groups see themselves as working on something greater than each of the individuals. And human beings, in order to not be cancerous, have to operate kind of like cells, where we see each other as a holon, not only individuals, but part of a greater whole. That term holon, by the way, is borrowed from Arthur Kessler.
Their life mission has been determined in development from the moment that they were born became the daughter cell of some mother cell. And they don't have any wherewithal to learn about the outside world and wonder whether or not maybe life would be better if they were not quite so cooperative. And religions were like that. Religions could rely on, and notice when I say rely on, there's nobody doing this relying. This is the religion itself that is designed by natural selection in such a way as to presuppose the relative ignorance of the parts that make it up. You don't have to go to...
So Daniel Dennett sees religion as having been selected for. I think that's fascinating. And it's to me, it's a kind of a brave thing to remember. As someone who believes in the power of natural selection and the universe is something which selects, why has religion been selected for? Maybe this is something that we can correspond with in the comments. I'd like to dialogue with you. Why do you think nature has selected religion?
Special lengths to shield the parts from information. Now that's all changed. It's changed hugely. And I think every religion in the world is on the cusp of either going extinct or transforming itself in ways that are really radical. There's no other option. They simply will not be able to continue with the information that is now readily available.
So Daniel Dennett said that religions will either go extinct or radically change. I think that the former one is highly speculative and doubtful that that's going to happen. And then the radical change is kind of so obvious as to really be uninformative. I don't know how we're, deeply informed by the idea that religion is going to change. It always has. I'll take option B over option A all day.
They can do the sort of religious equivalent of Bashar al-Assad and, enslave the people, imprison the people, kill the people. But if you're not prepared to put all the people basically in prison, they're going to get the information, and that's going to change everything. So
that they're going to get the information, and having that information is going to change everything. That's what's supposed. That reminds me of when Martin Luther gave the Novum Testum Graecae, or the Greek New Testament, to the people. He translated it into German, the language of the common people. And I might be incorrect. I think it was in Hamburg, Germany. And then when the people got the information, they didn't, become atheist at mass. They became Protestant. And so I don't know. I think that lots of things changed. Um, uh, I don't know. Has atheism changed, over the years? But saying that religion is going to change is shouldn't be shocking. It should be shocking if over the course of 100 years there is no change, right? Religion is something that is born to kind of blossom as new minds are introduced, I think.
Prescription for what we should be doing is very firmly but gently informing, letting people all over the world know about each other's religions and letting them mull those facts over. And if the leaders of those religions have to revise their practices to account for the fact that this is happening, they're going to transform religions in ways that are hard to imagine, but I think largely favorable.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I definitely like the way he thinks. That's my first really deep interaction with Dennet. I've seen him, have interactions on like podcasts, a little, but that's my first really formal introduction to Dennet. And those, criticisms of religion weren't scathing, and maybe I shouldn't have expected them to be. The title of that is Why Religion is a Myth. And there isn't anything wrong with myth. There are tons of facts, so many facts that we would be paralyzed if we had to interact with all of them. And so the way that we organize our facts, the hierarchy with which we kind of order the facts, that's the myth. So everyone has a myth. Religion is a myth for sure. There's nothing wrong with believing in myths. The word myth is not synonymous with lie or falsehood. But look, I appreciate you guys journeying with me so far. Definitely like, share, subscribe. And thanks for joining me in this journey through the mind of Daniel Dennett.